This is David Shepard. Great to be on the YouTube channel and just hit the subscribe button if you like what you hear in advance and hit it at the end, right? Twice is more the merry. But I'm joined by someone who I got to know at ESPN in research, and he's blown up in the soccer world, sorry, the football world,
Ah,
and someone that does great coverage for the sport that has a international following. And I'm someone right now that is getting into the World Cup, but is not going to pretend to be anything close to an expert. Paul Carr, I would qualify as an expert when it comes to the sport of football. So first and foremost, Paul, how you doing, my friend? And congratulations on what Team USA has looked like thus far in the World Cup.
hey, I had nothing to do with it, but I'll take it. I'll take a little bit anyway. We got some fun stats out of it, and I'm okay if you call it soccer. We call it soccer here in America. I know some, especially Euro snobs, may look down and want to call it football, but we got the term from England anyway, so they can't get too mad about it. So you want to call it soccer, you want to call it football. It doesn't bother me either way. I want people to call it what they call it because we're all talking about the same thing.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. So listen, everyone at ESPN knows, you're from the Midwest, grew up in Kansas. That's basketball, football country.
Hmm.
Some would consider it baseball if grew
Yeah.
up in the era of George Brett.
Yep.
How did you get into soccer?
So, I mean, it ties in nicely to this World Cup because, I mean, I grew up playing soccer like every kid till I was like 12. But the 1994 World Cup, I was 14. That was kind of my introduction to global soccer. I couldn't really watch anything before that. MLS didn't exist yet, didn't start till 1996. So the 94 World Cup was kind of my intro. I was like, oh, this is interesting. I was watching games as much as I could, and I didn't really know what was going on, but the international flavor of it all was super interesting. So I didn't suddenly turn into a super soccer guy overnight. It was kind of just planted that seed though. So then, 4 years later, there's another World Cup. Year after that, with the Women's World Cup, the US won, which was huge here. And then I went to college and worked with the soccer team and started watching games and peppering people with all the questions that I had no idea about how everything functioned at the club and country level internationally. So this World Cup will do the same thing for lots of people. It doesn't have to be players. It could be coaches. It could be rec league people. It could be, business people in the soccer world. A lot of people are going to catch the bug and it's going to plant these seeds that will sprout, it could be years or decades later. But that's what a World Cup can do here.
So it's a fair explanation, Paul Carr. When, you talk about what Team USA did, last week to Paraguay and the 4-1 victory. I don't think they've had that many goals since 1930, if memory serves me
Never had
correctly.
four in a World Cup game ever. Yeah.
Okay, but the three goal
3-goal win.
disparity,
Yeah.
right, is the greatest victory they've had since 1930
Yep.
in terms of obviously margin of victory.
Right.
They dominated with time of possession. They dominated with shots on goal. They dominated with chances created. To me, I can't recall any time in my lifetime where there has been such positivity and optimism when it comes to Team USA. Is that a fair assessment?
Probably. I mean, because it's not just that they won or that they won by 3 goals. Like you said, it's how they won. Because I think, I mean, we'll just use you as an example. Like it sounds like, they kind of roped you in just with how they were playing. Like they were attacking. This was,
Right.
your whatever, Paul Westhead's sons or something like that. Your Loyola Marymount, whatever, fast break type of team you want to talk about. They were on the go. They were taking people
That's a
on.
heck of an example, by the way. I love that we're integrating NBA into this
Yeah,
conversation.
we,
You
we
can
got
talk
to.
about the 7 seconds or less Phoenix Suns.
Right. That would have
You
been
could
that would have
talk,
been a little more relevant. Yeah.
right. You can talk about the Golden State Warriors with
Right.
Steve Kerr when he got there replacing Mark Jackson. I get the analogy.
Yeah. So I think it's how they did it. They didn't just kind of sit back and defend and grab a goal and sneak a win or something. But how they did it has people excited. Some people say it's the best win they've ever had. Um, I'd be hesitant to say that in a opening World Cup game, but you start factoring in how they did it, that it's here. Like it's just such a great way to start a World Cup and get people interested. And now obviously they're gonna have 2 more group games to ideally continue to grow that, and then some knockout rounds. So yeah, it wasn't necessarily the greatest win, but you add everything on top of that, and it might have been the latest most important win for the US.
So, Paul, when we're talking about the most important win for the U.S., obviously the best result they ever had, and you were not alive then. I was not alive then. Most people watching this were not alive then. It was 1930. And
Right.
correct me if I'm wrong, they finished third place?
They finished third. They reached the semis, lost in the semis, and FIFA declared them third place winners. Yeah.
And that was the inaugural World Cup, right?
Correct. Yeah, there were only, I forget, 14 teams, give or take. Yeah.
So we just saw the Knicks break a 53-year title drought,
Hmm.
right? And the Knicks were good this season, but nobody had them winning a
Right.
championship. No, no,
Right.
nobody. Like
Right.
maybe
They're
the most,
underdogs
yeah, the
at least to win the title the whole way.
right, the ultimate underdogs. The only time they were not considered to be, I would say, the favorite was in, I don't know, the last three rounds of the playoffs. But in the first round, they even found themselves down 2-1 against the Atlanta Hawks. So I know it's just one game.
Mhm.
But what chance do you give Team USA of making it to at least the knockout stage? Because correct
Yeah.
me if I'm wrong, they've only won one game in the knockout stage
Right.
in the last few decades,
I
right?
mean, ever. 2002 was the only one.
Right.
Um, so,
Yeah,
so par, here's what I've been saying. Par for this tournament for the US is to reach the round of 16, which is the second knockout round. By getting a win, they're pretty much locked into advancing because third place teams or 8 of 12 third place teams advance. So you have 4 points, you're almost guaranteed to go through. You get three and a not terrible goal difference, and you're probably going through. So the US already has 3 points and a +3 goal difference. So going through is not the objective now. I mean, it's always the
absolutely.
first step, but and the objective now is to win the group because you win the group and you play a third place team from another group, which probably means you're going to be better than they are if you're the US. So then you have your favorite in the round of 32. Then you get to the round of 16, and that's when you're going to run into, chances are a team that on paper is better than you. And so if you go out against and lose to Argentina or something in the round of 16, not the end of the world, but you obviously hope you can go farther and you hope you at least show well in that game. So nothing's really changed in my mind as far as par is still the round of 16. You got to get out of the group, which they will, and you got to win a knockout game. And then then it turns into a kind of a matchups game. It's kind of like, your NCAA tournament or something. Like you want to get to the Sweet 16 or so, and then you're
Right.
going to run into somebody good. It's just kind of how it works. So the U.S. is in a similar boat here.
Absolutely. And again, this is Paul Carr, somebody who does an excellent job covering the sport, Senior Director of Media and Business Operations for True Media Sports. He's been a mainstay at ESPN for over a decade, had a great career there, had a great run with TNT, CBS, Fox. I don't know if there's a network he hasn't worked for at this point. Paul, when it comes to Flo Balogun, that's how you pronounce
Hmm.
his name?
Yep, yep, you
Did I
got
get
it.
that right? I've heard
Yeah,
because it's amazing. I've heard like five different pronunciations on even the networks when they pronounce these guys'
yeah.
names because
The
again, they're stars like they are in the Olympics. You hear from them once in every 4 years. Although if you're really into Olympics, maybe in soccer it's once every 2 years. Flo had the first multi-goal game for any member of Team USA since 1930.
Yep.
Is this the greatest individual performance we've ever seen in the World
Oof.
Cup from any men's national team player?
Um, I mean, my knee-jerk answer is always to say no to something like that. Um, I'm just trying to think through off the top of my head. I mean, I think part of it is context, like you look at Donovan's goal against Algeria in 2010 that put them through, the Go-Go USA goal that put them through. Was that a
Sure.
probably wasn't a greater performance on the whole. I mean, you could argue that Balogun wasn't the best player on the field in that first match, whether it's Pulisic, who only played a half.
He
I
got, he
mean,
got hurt in the
yeah.
second half.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he said he tweaked something at halftime and he wasn't quite sure. He's been training by himself today, so we'll see if he goes. So I don't think it's the best performance, but you could argue more legitimately to me that it's the most important because the US I mean, really, Josie Altidore retired about a decade ago, and US hasn't really found a striker, a number nine, that guy up top who can bang in goals a lot. They haven't really found a reliable guy like that. But Balogun, switched allegiances to the U.S. a couple years ago, and he's been putting up double-digit goals in France for several years. So he's clearly has the ability, he knows where to go. I mean, you saw everything on display in that game against Paraguay. So that's what stands out. It's like U.S. needs a goal scorer like that because they've had wingers a lot. Your Donovans, your Dempseys are more wingers than that traditional number nine, but you need that guy in the middle. It's almost like an NBA center where you need someone to, this is another old school analogy, but you needed somebody to kind of run everything around to free up space for other people. And the center forward is sort of like that. And obviously you want him to score as well. But if he's on form and getting chances, like A, he's going to convert some of those, and B, it's just going to open things up for everyone else. So that's what the U.S. needs moving forward.
Paul, one thing I've appreciated about the sport of soccer, and you mentioned his name is Christian Pulisic. somebody who is not just the face of American men's soccer, but somebody who is clearly making a conscious effort to be out in the mass media, to be
Yeah.
out on social media.
Which is hard for him because he said he's an introvert. He doesn't like those things.
He's an
But that's
introvert.
how, yeah, oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
You never would, because I don't know if you've seen this. There's like an episode with him and Jamar Chase.
Hmm.
You know what I'm talking about?
I
Where they're like
don't.
they're like comparing and contrasting, like, football versus football,
Sure.
and it's really entertaining.
Yeah,
And I've seen him do solo interviews on the Today Show, on CBS Mornings, on the Tonight Show. Like, he's out there.
he's
I wish
done
hockey
a
would get the memo and put
yeah.
the face of their sport on mainstream television and social media, whether it's like a Connor McDavid, or, even
Hmm.
though they're older, Sidney Crosby, Alexander Ovechkin.
Yep.
You can certainly talk about, Connor Bedard, but he's been so good for
Yeah.
this sport. I feel like he's been everywhere the last year. And I know you mentioned Landon Donovan. Another individual that I think of when it comes to men's American soccer is Clint Dempsey.
Hmm.
Has Pulisic reached that level for you of being the greatest men's American soccer player, or does he have a little bit ways to go?
Depends on which way you define it. So if you're talking accomplishments with the national team, Pulisic is not there yet. I mean, he's
Okay.
at 30 some odd goals, and Dempsey and Donovan are at 57. And oh yeah, Donovan had 57 assists or 58 assists as well. So he's not there in that regard. But if we're talking like, is he the most talented and you could argue most accomplished player from a club perspective? So all encompassing, club and country, I would say yes. I mean, he won a Champions League with Chelsea, which no American had ever played in the final and won before. I mean, he has been the best player for AC Milan at times, and AC Milan's one of your 5 to 10 most historic, accomplished clubs in all of soccer. So, in that regard, I think he is the best, the most talented. So again, a little bit different question from most accomplished, but I think he
Right.
is the best player that the U.S. has produced.
Now, has he had a bigger impact on the men's game than Mia Hamm has had on the women's
Uh,
game?
No, part of that is where you're coming from. Like Mia Hamm was one of the, founding mothers, if you will, I guess,
Right, right.
of the U.S. women's national team. Like as they grew and won the World Cup in '91, won the World Cup in '99. She was kind of the face of that, and she was the one that everybody knew, and the one that still everyone knows in a lot of ways.
Right.
So no, just because of that. I mean, Mia Hamm inspired so many, I mean, generations, of players that have played for the U.S. and played everywhere will point to him. And Pulisic hasn't done that. Donovan didn't do that. I mean, you almost can't though, just because of, it's like there's only one George Washington. Was he the greatest president? I have no idea. I'm not a historian, but he was the first and kind of the most important in so many ways. And anyone who comes later is just going to have different sorts of standards they have to live up to.
Well, I know in Group D, I believe,
Yep.
between the U.S. and the other three teams, they're playing the other team that won in Group D
Yep.
on Friday. It seems like you like their chances
Yeah.
against the mates from down
Australia.
under.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Australia's on paper coming in the worst team in the group. I mean, just by consensus. Like no one's really going to argue that. Now they may be. Obviously, they beat Turkey. They look like they could beat Paraguay. But there wasn't a giant gap in those four teams. But if you're power ranking before the tournament, Australia's number four, and the U.S. played Australia last fall and beat them 2-1. And 2-1 was about how the game went. Like the U.S. had better chances on the whole. They didn't totally dominate, but they controlled the game more or less. U.S. has far more upside than Australia does. Australia doesn't have the same kind of firepower that the U.S. has. And what they do have is a decent, they're going to defend tough, they're going to be physical, they're going to counterattack, which is what they did, especially on their first goal against Turkey. They got a couple of young guys who can get out and run on the break. So they're going to try to do that. But the U.S. is favored in this game, as they should be. They should win this game, and you win this game, you could win the group. You definitely clinch a spot in the knockout stage, and it just puts you in great position to, do you need to rest guys or mix things up a little in the third group game? But yeah, the U.S. should win this game. They're not head and shoulders, miles and miles better than Australia, but they are better. They have more upside, more experience. They should win this match.
You ready for a couple questions about ESPN?
Let's
Probably
go.
some names you haven't heard in a long time.
Yep, I got stories. Let's go.
So, so I think of Jeff Bennett. I think of Mike Gersh. Craig Wax. Hillary London. Then I think of individuals that were like peers and not bosses, like Chris Fallica,
Mhm.
yourself. There's Mark Simon. We had some, we had some really good people
Yep.
that we worked with. Um, Greg Found is a really good guy.
Hmm.
Like I mean, these were great dudes that we had the privilege of working with back in our
Yep.
research days at ESPN. I'm just curious, was there a researcher or somebody who was a quote unquote talent that had a big impact on your career and has I don't want to say a huge influence, but a role in how successful you have become?
I will point to Jeff Bennett, whom you mentioned. I mean, he hired me into the department. So at that point, he was obviously a director, senior director, whatever the title was.
Yes.
Um, so, just his, and this is more, I think, as I've kind of gotten older and moved into some similar kinds of roles, just the way that he, listened to people and understood them and understood what the role was and is trying to make them better and trying to make the department better and put people in the right spots. Just the way that he managed and led, like he had done what we were doing, so we knew that we would follow him and everything, and had the foresight to build the ESPN analytics team. So really admire that. And he also wasn't afraid to like respond to an email and say, "Hey, don't forget about this idea," with that story that you're working on, and things like that. So he had proven himself and was wanted to share that and help others grow into those roles and do similar sorts of things. So, I mean, he's a guy I thought about lately. He left ESPN or was let go not too long ago and has done some other stuff. So I've always admired Jeff and and just the way he did it also. It's a business and it can be tough, but he always managed to lead with kindness and understanding, which I've always admired.
Absolutely, but Paul, to your, I mean, I love working for Jeff. I thought he was salt of the earth. I thought he was a really good dude, and still is obviously. I mean, but when I look at your career and what you built for yourself, I mean, you have a huge following in terms of people that consume the sport of soccer, and people really rely on you. You've touched Fox, TNT, CBS. You're now the senior
Yeah.
director of media and biz operations, and that's not an easy transition to go from behind the scenes and be a person who matters on social media, be a person who matters in the soccer, ethosphere. Is there a particular talent that influenced you and rubbed off on you and made you feel or influenced you and impacted you where you could transition into being on air?
I mean, I'll point to a guy you mentioned. I'll point to Chris Fallica, who was a researcher at ESPN. He's the bear on College Game Day, or was, and now has a similar role with Fox.
Right.
I worked with him at the 2010 World Cup in South Africa, and so I'd been at ESPN about 2 years, and really saw uh, just how he worked with talent. Like Chris Fowler was there, and Fallica and Chris Fowler were tight and had done lots of game days together. So just watching him work with talent a little bit differently really showed me how to continue to do that. And then, obviously he evolved into an on-air presence, which was something that, in some capacity was interesting to me. And so, yeah, so using him, I don't know if using him as a model is quite the right thing, but
Yeah.
just showing like, look, these are steps and directions you can go, doing different things, how to work with different people, that kind of stuff. So he's one guy that I've worked with a lot and admired and followed in his footsteps to varying degrees.
It's a great answer, and he's obviously blown up in the world of college football, and someone that obviously has a national platform and has for over a decade. So we love the Bear, we love Chris Fallica. Again, you are listening to Paul Carr. You can follow him at social media at Paul Carr, Senior Director of Media and Business Operations. One more for you, just because I don't catch up with many ESPN guys, from back 15, 16 years ago. What did you learn the most about yourself in your decade plus at ESPN?
Yeah, I mean, I just learned the most from being around people, and I mean that in two ways. One is like you're at ESPN, you're at like these are the best of the best in whatever producing graphics, whatever. Doesn't mean everyone's perfect. Everyone's got issues and whatever. And so you're just working at the highest level where the expectations are the highest, and you just kind of learn how you can drive yourself and how you can be your best, which is something. And you also just learn because this is a national company, you learn how to work with all kinds of people. You know, grew up in Kansas, Midwest, generally nicer, all those cliches, somewhat true. But you go to the East Coast, there's a lot of East Coasters, there's people from all over the country. So you're dealing with all kinds of people, shapes, sizes, colors, genders, whatever it is, and fans of different teams. I didn't grow up around a lot of Yankees fans or Red Sox fans, and suddenly I'm surrounded by them, which was, for better and worse. And so you have to learn how to navigate all that and work with different kinds of people on different things because you have all kinds of different fandoms and beliefs and opinions, but you got to work together because we're all trying to make really good TV, and that's why we're there. So kind of those things is learn how to get the best out of yourself, working with other people, and also how to just deal with different kinds of people in different ways.
Well, there's a lot of egos and personalities
Right,
and
right,
dynamics at ESPN, and you got to know what your lane is. You have to
right,
know what buttons to push on certain people when you want to get a rise out of them, and you also have to know when not to push certain
right.
buttons. But ESPN was such a meaningful time in my life, and I'm glad it was for you as well. We would not have the careers today if we were not there. And it's always good to catch up with somebody who I respected in my time there. And Paul, congrats again on what you're doing in sports and in media and in leadership. And the next World Cup will certainly get you on again.
Oh,
And
yeah.
just continued success, man. And again, you can follow Paul Carr at Paul Carr on any social media platform. And I know there's a lot of people that want to get into the World Cup. So you got all the incentive to follow Paul Carr.
Hey,
Make sure you're catching his work. Paul, appreciate you, man.
you bet. If you can't get into soccer now, then I can't help you because this is as good as it gets.